Amen. All right, 2 Samuel, chapter 8 is where we're at right now. Remember, we're sort of taking in three different chapters right now. Chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10. They're all sort of coming together here. We're calling this the good days of David. He's having victories that are coming his way, and that's wonderful. We're reading about battles, and he's winning in all of these, giving credit to God for it. Chapter 9, we're going to run into the son of Jonathan. Try to keep your timeline together. Jonathan's been dead for some time now. He died with his father on Mount Gilboa. Close of 1 Samuel, chapter 31. As that book closed, you have Saul and his sons dying on Mount Gilboa. Jonathan's passed away in battle, but he has a son, and we're going to meet him in chapter 9. And then in chapter 10 there's another battle, and I'm saying this is the battle that didn't have to be, and we're going to run into that in chapter 10. We're going to try to and so David's really having a lot of battles that he's going through. Remember, this is not necessarily chronological information, but giving it in these subjects. And so the battles of David, the expanding of the kingdom. Now we are down to your handout, the top of page 2 in chapter 8, and we're finishing up this material. And we've noticed that David is acknowledging God in all of these things. Verses 1 through attention to something David's doing. In chapter 8, verse 11, King David also dedicated these to the Lord. And by these, we're talking about silver, we're talking about gold, we're talking about precious metals and the treasures, the bounty that he's taking from all these victories they're having. And he's grouping all of this together. And in verse 11, he dedicated these to the Lord with the silver and gold that he had dedicated from all the nations which he had subdued. Well, what's he going to do with all that stuff? Is he just building bigger barns like the guy in the New Testament parable? Is he just building bigger barns? What's he going to do with all the silver, gold, bronze? What's he going to do with it? The temple. This has to do with the temple. So this is the storehouse to supply for the building of the temple and the things that will furnish it, things that pertain to that. Notice 1 Kings chapter 7, verse 51. Thus all the work that King Solomon performed in the house of the Lord was finished. Solomon didn't build, or David didn't build it, his son Solomon did. And Solomon brought in the things dedicated by his father David, the silver and the gold and the utensils, and he put them in the treasuries of the house of the Lord. And by that we gather that David had so much, it not only supplied the building of the temple, but had plenty left over to be brought into the treasuries of the temple. If you compare with 1 Chronicles chapter 22, 1 Chronicles chapter 22, and I'm beginning reading here in verse 14. Now behold, with great pains I have prepared for the house of the Lord. This is David. He's on his way out. Speaking to Solomon, he's on his way in. And David tells his son, with great pains I have prepared for the house of the Lord 100,000 talents of gold and 1,000,000 talents of silver and bronze and iron beyond weight. For they are in great quantity. Also timber and stone I have prepared, and you may add to them. Moreover, there are many workmen with you, stone cutters and masons of stone and carpenters, and all men who are excuse me, and all men who are skillful in every kind of work. Of the gold, the silver, and the bronze, and the iron, there's no limit. Arise and work, and may the Lord be with you. So David's gathering all of this in his lifetime. He had the idea, we read about it in chapter 7, and now you see him gathering all this material, and you see how much there is by the time Solomon comes in, and you may add to it, he tells him. And then there's so much left over when the temple's built, they're bringing it into the treasuries of the temple. There's a bounty of all of this. God's really blessed them in this way. And we're learning from David how to handle our successes. Think about where your mind would go with this. I was just listening to the news this past week, and I guess there was a big lottery, right? Something like $1.3 billion. And the report came across the radio that somebody won it. Somebody had the winning ticket. I don't know where it was, but it was somewhere, maybe Pennsylvania or something. Somebody bought that winning ticket. $1.3 billion. Where would your mind be? David collecting all this silver, gold, bronze, iron, all this stuff, stone, and precious wood to bring in for this. Where would your mind be if you had all of that? And so we're learning from David how to handle our successes, the military successes, and then you see him acknowledging God. He's giving God credit. The Lord helped him in all of these places. The Lord helped him in all of these victories. David's recognizing all of that. And then on top of that, he's remembering his role as a king. He's not forgetting that. You think about that. Okay, if I had $1.3 billion, where would my mind be? Oh, I want to go here, I want to go there, I want to buy this, I want to buy that, I want to enjoy this, I want to go on that trip. Where would your mind be with all of that? David's remembering his role as a king. 2 Samuel 8 verse 15, so David reigned over all Israel, and David administered justice and righteousness for all his people. His responsibility as a king is not forgotten. All the victories, acknowledging God, wanting to build God a house, asking for God's blessing in that, seeking God's approval, and He gives it through His son Solomon, collecting for all of this, and his mind is still on God, serving the people, administering justice, not forgetting any of those things. How do you handle your successes? Sometimes it really goes to our head, and we all but disappear from the Lord's purpose in His church. We all but disappear from it because we've got all this stuff and we want to go enjoy all these things, and we get sometimes selfish with life and forget about our role of service in God's kingdom. David teaches us how to handle those sorts of things. Anything else that you want to mention here? Chapter 8 is going to close with a list of David's officials. This is always fun because it gets into names. So we'll just see how we do with this. This is verses 16 through 18 of chapter 8. Joab, the son of Zeruiah. Remember, Zeruiah is David's sister. And so Joab is his nephew. Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was over the army. Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was recorder. Zadok, the son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, the son of Abiathar, were priests. And Sariah was secretary. Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over the Kerethites and Pelethites, and David's sons were chief ministers. And depending on your translation, some of those words will change a little bit and maybe give you a different idea. But this is a list of David's officials. This is not an exhaustive list. You'll find some other additions to that in some other places. But you have a military leader, you have somewhat of a secretary and a herald to communicate to the people. That's Jehoshaphat. You have a religious leadership through the priesthood of Zadok and Ahimelech. Then you have a secretary and a scribe, maybe a royal scribe or official documents, something like that, with Sariah. And then Benaiah over the Kerethites and Pelethites. They're sort of a special forces unit that David has. You'll find them mentioned here and there. Kerethites and Pelethites, and Benaiah is over them. When you get to 2 Samuel chapter 20, that's out a ways yet. When you get to 2 Samuel chapter 20 and verse 23, you're going to read about a fellow by the name of Adoram. And he's added to this list, and he is over forced labor. Think about that. He is over forced labor. And that's going to come into play when we get beyond Solomon to Rehoboam, Solomon's son. And the kingdom divides. Remember how they complained? Remember how they complained about, relax the burden of your father Solomon? And Rehoboam said, my pinky is as thick as my father's thigh. I'm going to really bring it. You think my father was rough? I'm going to really bring it. And that's when the kingdom divides from the north and the south. And this forced labor has a lot to do with that. We often have probably heard that it was about taxation. I don't think that's the main issue. I think the main issue is the forced labor that he's putting them under. And so maybe you'll begin reading about that. There's a seed for thought for you to think about, and follow that line of reasoning until you get to the days of Rehoboam and see if that makes sense. I began piecing that together, and I think that's probably what the main issue is. All right, we're going to start chapter 9, and this is a rather short chapter, and it's about Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan. Any comments before we start chapter 9? Here we go. Then David said, is there yet anyone left of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? This is interesting to me as we begin this. The dust is settling in David's life. Remember, we're not necessarily in chronological order. So as the dust settles from all the battles, chapter 7 said, he began to think about the Ark of the Covenant needs a better place to be. The dust settles and his mind is on God. The dust settles in chapter 9 and his mind is on the promises that he has made, and he wants to be sure to fulfill those. What about Jonathan's family? Those two guys were together. They were as close in covenant and relationship to God as you can get. And they made a covenant with each other. And Jonathan made David swear an oath that he wouldn't forget his descendants and he would treat them kindly. And so now with the dust settling around David and he's coming to his throne in full, is there anybody left of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was, and I've always said, and I've always heard it said Ziba, but I'm looking at how that's written, Z-I-B-A. That's probably Ziba. It's probably how that needs to be pronounced. And so I may flip back and forth between Ziba and the way I've always heard it, Ziba. If I do, I just look at the spelling, and that's probably Ziba is the way to say that. And so there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba, and they called him to David. And the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" And he said, "I'm your servant." The king said, "Is there not yet anyone of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God?" And Ziba said to the king, "There's still a son of Jonathan who is crippled in both feet." So the king said to him, "Where is he?" And Ziba said to the king, "Behold, he's in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel in Lodebar." Then King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir in the son of Ammiel from Lodebar. Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and prostrated himself. That just means he fell flat down, face down on the ground before David. A great showing of respect. And David said, Mephibosheth. And he said, Here is your servant. David said to him, Do not fear, for I will surely show kindness to you for the sake of your father Jonathan, and will restore to you all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you shall eat at my table regularly. Again he prostrated himself and said, What is your servant that you should regard a dead dog like me? Do you remember hearing that phrase before? A dead dog like me? Does that ring a bell? You probably got a cross-reference there. And if you do, you might go backward in time and see where that phrase was used in another place. Because this would have had a familiar sound to David's ears. And now Mephibosheth is saying, Why are you having regard for a dead dog like me? Then the king called Saul's servant Ziba, and said to him, All that belonged to Saul and to all his house I've given to your master's grandson. You and your sons and your servants shall cultivate the land for him, and you shall bring in the produce so that your master's grandson may have food. Nevertheless, Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall eat at my table regularly. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, According to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so your servant will do. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table as one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah. And all who lived in the house of Ziba were servants to Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he ate at the king's table regularly. Now he was lame in both feet. So what do you remember about Mephibosheth? What did we say about his feet and how they became lame? Refresh our memories for class. How did that happen? He got dropped by his nurse. His nurse, I will never go to that hospital. He got dropped by his nurse. She was someone caring for the little ones. There, for him in particular, that the one who was going to nurse him, take care of him, and help him as a baby, as an infant. And so his nurse dropped him. Well, was she just butterfingers? What was going on? What was happening? They're trying to get away. They were in a hurry. This is a rush kind of situation. This is at the end of 1 Samuel when they're battling the Philistines, and the news comes back that the Israelites have lost the battle. And Saul and his sons, including Jonathan, the father of Mephibosheth, were killed. And that means the Philistines are swarming. They're swarming in. And so she realizes what's about to happen. And she picks up this baby, this child, this little boy. She picks him up and she begins to run with him and drops him. And whatever happens, he ends up crippled in both feet, obviously breaks bones. And he's crippled in both of his feet. So 2 Samuel 4 and verse 4, Now Jonathan, Saul's son, had a crippled son in his feet. He was 5 years old when the report of Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. Jezreel was the battlefield up in the north country of Canaan land. That's where the battle was taking place. And his nurse took him up and fled, and it happened that in her hurry to flee, he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. So this goes back to when he was 5. And he was fine before that. But when he fell in the rush, he became lame in both of his feet. That's how he's been living. Now, how much time has passed? He was 5. How much time has passed? He's got a small child of his own. He's got a boy named Micah. He has his own small boy. So now the 5-year-old has his own little boy. So that's how much time has passed. However much time that is, can't be definite about it, but there's a lot of time. It's a significant amount of time. You think about the end of 1 Samuel with the death of Jonathan and Saul. You think about David and what he's been through, and now the 5-year-old boy has a boy of his own. That's how much time has passed when we come to this text. And so remember that when you turn the pages of your Bible, there can be a significant amount of time, or it cannot even be in chronological order. You can be going back and forth through time, and we need to give careful attention to that in our studies. So we did this one other time. We're going to do it again here. See if you remember. Mephibosheth had another name. What was it? What was it? Merib-Baal. You were in that category, Merib-Baal. And you think, Baal, that's a false god. Was he named after a false god? Well, Merib has to do with being contentious, a contender, striving against Baal would be the idea of that alternate name. So he was known as Merib-Baal. Your text there is 1 Chronicles 8, verse 34. The son of Jonathan was Merib-Baal, and Merib-Baal became the father of Micah. So we're talking about Mephibosheth, and that's his alternate name. And he's been hiding out at this place called Lo-debar. And he's been hiding out there since he was 5 years old and running for his life. And he's been there. And that Lo-debar was mentioned also in 2 Samuel 17 when David was on the run from Absalom, his son. You're going to find it mentioned there, Lo-debar. And somebody came from Lo-debar to help bring supplies to David. So this is a place that we've run across before. Seems to be across the Jordan River on the east side, probably in the region of Gilead, North Country somewhere. Exactly where, I don't know. Some have suggested by the Yarmuk River. If you're looking at the map I've given to you, it's not on there. You'll have to look at a different map to find all of that. That has to do with the battles we're coming up to in chapter 10. Now, Ziba. Who was he? Who was Ziba? Okay, he is a servant in the house of King Saul. But King Saul's dead. He's been dead for a long time. A lot of time has passed. Mephibosheth was 5. Now he's got a boy of his own. There's that much time that has passed. Saul's house, basically, that dynasty came to an end. Ziba was a servant in that household. What's he been doing? Well, he hadn't been caring for Mephibosheth yet. All during this big gap from the death of Saul and Jonathan, he's a servant in that house. That dynasty comes to an end. What's Ziba been doing? Well, taking care of Ziba. He's doing his own thing. That Saul's gone. And so there's this huge gap of years in here, and Ziba's sort of doing his own thing. And he's wealthy. If you go down to verse 10 of our reading, he has sons and he has servants. He has 15 sons and he has 20 servants. That's a pretty large crew. Ziba's doing okay. Ziba's doing pretty well. Now, David approaches him. He says, anybody from the house of Saul around here? And somebody says, yeah, I remember Ziba. He was a servant of Saul's. All right, let's go. Let's have a meeting with Ziba. And he does. And he says, Ziba, who's left of the household of Saul so I can honor my covenant with Jonathan? And he said, well, Jonathan's got this son, crippled in both feet, Mephibosheth. He's over there in Lo-debar. And David says, okay. So he meets with Mephibosheth, tells Mephibosheth everything. And then he tells Ziba, by the way, now instead of being servant to Saul, now you're going to be servant to his grandson. You and your 15 sons and your 20 servants, you're going to take care of all this. I'm giving him all the property of Saul. And you're going to take care of it. You're going to cultivate the fields. You're going to grow the stuff. You're going to harvest the crops. And you're doing all this in service now to Mephibosheth. And I'm just thinking, if I was Ziba, would I be happy? I've been doing my own thing for a lot of years. And I'm doing really well. And now, all of a sudden, I'm a servant again, connected to the house of Saul, this time for his grandson. And so instead of my own business I'm taking care of, now I'm taking care of the boss's business again. And so if I'm Ziba, I'm thinking, I'm not really happy right now. It's good to have a job, but he was doing okay. And later, we're going to see Ziba pulling some shenanigans. And I think we need to connect it all the way back to this, to figure out why he would do such a thing. So keep that in mind for future reading. And Mephibosheth, he's not a threat to David's throne at all. Crippled in both feet, what's he going to do? He can't do much. There's really not much that he can do. So his response to David is to be humble in the presence of David, fall down on his face, and you know, who am I? You know, I'm just a dead dog. I'm nothing. I can't produce anything. I can't be fruitful for you. I'm of no help to you. And I'm from the other dynasty of Saul. I'm a dead dog. And if you will remember, there was a time back, and this goes back to 1 Samuel chapter 24, when Saul is chasing David. And Saul goes into the cave. And David and all of his men are in there, remember? And David lets him live. And that's a line that David used with King Saul. Who is this dead dog that the king has come out to pursue? And David described himself that way to the house of Saul. Now you have the house of Saul describing himself that way to David. That would have rung a bell with David. David was making a plea to King Saul. You're pursuing someone who's not your enemy. You're pursuing someone who's no threat to you. And now from the house of Saul, Mephibosheth repeats that back to David. I'm the dead dog. I'm not your enemy. I'm no threat to you. And so that would have really been a memory for David to hear those words. Other comments you have there? Anything that I passed over too quickly or we need to talk about? All right. We are going to chapter 10. This is going to be on the back page of your handout. And let's read the first 5 verses. This is the war that didn't have to be. Now it happened afterwards that the king of the Ammonites died, and Hanun his son became king in his place. Then David said, I will show kindness to Hanun the son of Nahash, just as his father showed kindness to me. So David sent some of his servants to console him concerning his father. But when David's servants came to the land of the Ammonites, the princes of the Ammonites said to Hanun their lord, do you think that David's honoring your father because he has sent consolers to you? Has David not sent his servants to you in order to search the city, to spy it out, and to overthrow it? So Hanun took David's servants and shaved off half of their beards and cut off their garments in the middle as far as their hips and sent them away. When they told it to David, he sent to meet them. For the men were greatly humiliated. And the king said, stay at Jericho until your beards grow, and then return. I hope you've got some geography in mind. Ammonites, you're going across the Jordan River. Jericho is on the Jerusalem side of the Jordan River. So they've been over there, been humiliated, made it back just across the river to Jericho, And that's as far as they come, and David sends to meet them because they're so humiliated. And so here's the scene. We've read what's going on there, and we need to recapture some Old Testament history. What do you remember about the Ammonite people? Where do they come from? Man, aren't you glad you're not playing Jeopardy for the big money? This would be so important. Your answer would be, who is the grandson of Lot? Ammon. And that would be your answer in Jeopardy. So this goes all the way back there to Genesis chapter 19, when God rains down fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot and his wife and their 2 daughters are hightailing it out of there for the hills. And his wife looks back and becomes a pillar of salt, and he goes on with his 2 daughters, and they go and they hide out in a cave, and here's the fire and brimstone falling out of the sky. You can imagine the sight and the smell of all of that. And the daughters think that, okay, they're the last people alive on the face of the earth. And they get their father drunk one after the other, one night after the other. And they have a sexual relationship with their father while he's drunk out of his mind. And they both have children. And one of them is Ammon. Genesis 19, beginning in verse 36. Thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. As for the younger, she also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ammi. He is the father of the sons of Ammon to this day. So, when the Israelites are traveling through the wilderness and they're coming up on the east side of the Jordan River, and they're taking the east side in military force, and then they're going to cross over the river and come into Canaan land proper. While they're still on the east side of the river, they're over there and they're heading that direction. You have some instruction that goes all the way back to the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 19. I'm turning there. Deuteronomy 2 and verse 19. That means if I have time to turn there, you probably do too. We'll see. When you come opposite the sons of Ammon, do not harass them, nor provoke them, for I will not give you any of the land of the sons of Ammon as a possession, because I've given it to the sons of Lot as a possession. I've given it to the sons of Lot. His grandson is the founder of the Ammonites. When you come into that area, you don't bother any of their stuff. I'm not giving you any of the land of their possession. I've given it to the descendants of Lot. So the Israelites have this instruction as they come into the land. Now, Joshua 13, verses 24 and 25. This is when they actually are coming in and taking the area. Joshua 13, verses 24 and 25. Moses also gave an inheritance to the tribe of Gad. To the sons of Gad, according to their families, their territory was Jazer, and all the cities of Gilead, and half the land of the sons of Ammon, as far as Aroer, which is before Rabbah. I'm not giving you any of the land of the Ammonites. And they were awarded half the land of the sons of Ammon. What about that? How do you answer that? What are you going to do with it? Somewhat of a dilemma. Not going to give any of it to you. but half of their land was given to the tribe of Gad. There's your homework. That's what I want you to begin looking into for next week. How do we solve this riddle? What's going on there? What was happening with that? And then we're going to continue on through chapter 10. And remember that David has sent someone, he sent his men to go and console, sent messengers to go console Hanun, the son of Nahash, Ammonite ruler. The dad has died. Somewhere, we don't know where, he treated David kindly. Maybe while he was on the run from Saul, from Absalom, I don't know. But the Ammonite king, the dad, had treated David kindly. And David is going to return by consoling his son Hanun at the death of his father. But the son has younger counselors around him. And they say, oh, he doesn't care a thing about you. We've been watching him. Victory after victory after victory. He's broadening out his kingdom north, south, east, west. You think he's coming here because he cares about you? He doesn't care about you. He wants to send spies in, figure out where your weaknesses are, and then he's going to come attack us. Because they didn't understand the background history. Now, we want to open up class next week. How do we solve the riddle? You can't have any of the sons of Ammon, but Gad gets half of their land. How do we solve the riddle? Number 2, there is a major lesson to learn as we move from one generation to the next generation. And the younger generation doesn't understand the history. They don't understand the facts. They don't know the background. Therefore, they give poor counsel. There's a major lesson to be applied in that. So that's where we're headed next week as we go in to finish up chapter 10. Then I'll have a new handout printed for you and ready to go when we finish that up. We covered at least a chapter and a half today. We did really good. I appreciate your time. Is there anything you want to say in the last 30 seconds? Okay. Good to have you here this morning. We're dismissed from class.